Hey Guru Nation, welcome back to another episode. This one's special. It's real, it's raw, it's unfiltered podcast. We've got Dr. Fox on, we've got Chris Sauber on, and Dr. Charlin on, who's a PI. And we're gonna start off with payments, but then we're gonna get into strategically choosing studies for your site. Once you hit a level to where you can start saying no to studies, because initially no one can really say no when you're just starting out. You say yes to every study that comes your way, but at around the 1 year mark or so, you can start getting more selective about the studies you choose, and then you can even get more strategic about choosing certain studies based on other studies you have in order to make the screen failures fit in another study. So with that being said, let's get into payments first, because payments is a huge issue in our industry. Dr. Charlin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your site, your practice, and all that stuff?
Yeah, so 2015, I opened an independent clinical neurology practice. It's actually a little more integrative. So not only do we do all the usual things with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, that kind of thing in terms of drug diagnostics and drug management, but I actually bring in nutrition and movement and other things to really help people. I come from an academic background. I've done my work at Emory University, University of Virginia, and Vanderbilt, a little bit at Wake Forest even. So I've done a lot of research. I've been exposed to a lot of research. I've had my name on quite a few, I don't not quite a few publications, but enough that you can certainly find me on PubMed. And shortly after we opened in 2015, Novartis approached me to get involved with what is now called Kesimpta, but at the time, ofatumumab, which is a monoclonal antibody for treatment of multiple sclerosis. And some previous history with them. So it was like, oh yeah, let's, we're opening the practice. Let's do a clinical trial. I had, the experience. I had an employee who had been a research nurse with a different clinical research organization. So it all seemed to fit nicely. And I think, there's that element of keeping a foot in clinical trials to give some credibility to your practice, some authority, and that kind of thing. Fast forward, things really grew. We now have over 30 clinical trials. We've, of course, made plenty of mistakes along the way, which is, a whole other podcast, I'm sure. But we're become, much larger, and we have several more in the wings. We now have, multi-million-dollar contracts. But with those types of, opportunities, it creates costs. So my business overhead as a whole, with all the different divisions, runs about 200,000 a month. And we can meet those costs, but at the same time, when big payments that are due to us don't come in a timely manner for whatever reason, I still have to pay $200,000 in overhead no matter what. Of course, the employees always come first, right? So this is the challenge we've had. We've learned a few lessons along the way, like trying to contract, making sure we're contracting for monthly payments, not quarterly payments. We have been onboarding with CRO, so using, clinical trial management software to be a more streamlined. But in the end, it is very, very frustrating. And I'm not sure, growth sometimes happens faster than you realize it, or you don't necessarily take into account all the costs. And I'm sort of at the point where, I think the research is fun and interesting. I'm in my late 50s, so I could use research as part of my retirement plan where I am still a PI, but hey, no call, no weekends, no nights, that kind of thing. Pretty straightforward. Come in, do the assessments and all that, get paid. So I like it, but I can't, it's sort of like the big weight that feels like it's taken the whole ship down, you know? And so we have to solve this problem of being paid in a timely and reliable manner. You get into lines of credit and things like that, but that gets to be a slippery slope. So that's as short as I can make it. Happy to.
Well, Doctor, I'll give my 2 cents first. Obviously, it's best if you don't take out lines of credit. I know sometimes that can't be avoided. If it were me and my site, I think I would demand payment of any interest you've had to pay from the sponsor for a late payment. You may have to show proof of that, but I would demand that. Depending on how behind they are in payments, I guess the last bullet in your gun in terms of what to utilize to force payments, the last bullet is to cease all communications with the sponsor in terms of allowing them on your site to review the data. The CRAs no longer allowed on site. There will be no more data entered into EDC. You'll maintain the protocol in terms of seeing patients as the study requires, but you will no longer provide them with the data, and they will have no access to the data. The CRAs will not be allowed on site until you receive payment. This usually generates payment rather quickly, usually, not always, but usually. Again, you want to try and use all other possibilities to get payment before doing that, because some sponsors won't want to work with you again. But if it's to the point where you don't want to work with them again, best to do that, because it doesn't matter if you burn a bridge, right? Just get paid.
Right.
But again, a part of that equation would be if you've literally taken out loans to meet your overhead and responsibilities of the study, I would force payment by the sponsor of that as well before they're allowed.
Make that a
access
pass
to
through,
data.
Chris.
Huh?
Make that a pass through.
Yeah, whatever
the
they want to
interest
do,
of your
however they want
loans.
to pay it,
Well,
but they have
yeah.
to pay.
Right, and this is, I 100% agree. This is obviously also for your listeners. So this, it kind of comes in waves where the payments are coming in smoothly and then something happens. So I have written letters and copied 1 million people on them, and then usually things get worked out because they tend to listen to me more than they listen to my research manager.
Yep, they do.
So that can be effective. In this particular case, some of the fault is my own in the sense that it is and it isn't, that as we grew and created all these LLCs, which have their own tax ID numbers, we then went to protect that whole corporate veil. We went to our bank and we set up separate accounts and then have a pass-through account. So we had to redo the contracts with the new entity tax ID number.
Yep. And that's all
And then
different direct
some
deposits too,
hiccup
isn't it?
happened and,
Yep.
150,000 in payments don't come through. Is that my fault? Well, we provide them with the correct information, and then of course the payer is contracted with the sponsor, so it's not the same entity, and payers in India, and then you can only email them. It's not like you get on the phone and say, hey, what was the problem with setting up this ACH, right? Because did we do something? Do you have the correct numbers? Let's get on the phone. Let's have the bank on the phone. Bank says we didn't get any attempted payment. They say we attempted payment and it got rejected. But there's nobody that you can actually talk to, which is a huge part of the frustration.
Dr. Charlin, is this a CRO you're dealing with or a sponsor? Have you identified the source of the issue?
Well, it's I wish I had my manager with me, but it's the company that, say in this particular case, is Eli Lilly, contracts with to handle their payment system. And then some of the payments come directly from Eli Lilly. And generally, once we got things kind of ironed out, the payments from Eli Lilly were coming in more consistently. And then in this, we work with several sponsors. So I'm not trying to point the fingers or blame one in particular, but it's just as you're pointing out, and the whole reason for the podcast, these are very, very common problems.
Yeah.
And
I can tell you Eli Lilly has one of the higher PACT scores in the industry. So they're very, very good. Sorry, I invented my own credit score for sponsors and CROs. So I know based off of business practices what their dependability is. It's a credit score. And Eli Lilly has one of the better ones. I just did a podcast on this, interviewing 2 people on this subject. And so it's very fresh with me. But what I can tell you is what you're going through is unfortunately the industry standard. You've got physicians who want to do research and who are running into so many barriers that they're just saying, you know what, this isn't worth my time. It isn't worth the frustration. They make this really hard to get the money, and I can't put my neck out on the line like this. They're just not treating me professionally or respectfully. And what we're finding is, like what Chris was saying, unfortunately, the industry standard to get to this point is an escalation. If you're just like, okay, data stops, the gravy train stops until you're compliant with your payments, generally you'll get paid within 3 to 5 days.
It does work.
And
Yeah.
it works every time. So if you contact your CRA, you say, okay, we're done here until I get my money. Then wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden there's a magic switch somewhere, it's flipped, and you get paid within the week.
A lot of times these I have friends that are study directors at pharma and small biotech, so large and small. When they hire a CRO, they actually give them like an escrow account that's to be used for sites. I don't know if it's actually escrow account, but they give them
Oh.
funds for site payments.
You know what they call them? There's a term for it. They call it a drawdown account. It's a tab. And it's called a drawdown account. CRO has the money. It's in a bank account, sitting at the CRO's bank account, collecting interest. And they're still, even with the money in their bank account, they're late on their sites almost 100% of the time. They take full advantage of the kindness of our sites being willing to take care of our patients.
Right. So when
it's
when you use
frustrations like
those
this.
when you use those techniques for trying to get your payment, like, okay, no more, we're not answering any more queries, we're not allowing any more monitors to come in, you'll see how quickly you get it. Now, if it still takes a while to get it, it could be a sponsor funding issue. Because I've had
Yeah.
those cases too, where it's like usually a smaller biotech. It's usually not the big pharma, and I've had good experiences with Eli Lilly. So in your case, I would venture to guess it's a CRO that's causing the holdup.
Yeah.
So
And
if
I'm pretty sure I know which one it is.
yeah, me too. So I'm pretty sure if you use that, like send that email today, you'll get a payment in a few days because Eli Lilly gave them money. Eli Lilly has money.
But what I can say is it can be a lot easier. I really appreciate what you've grown in research, and you should not have to go through this. If it don't feel alone, don't feel like other people aren't going through this, because they are, and they're willing to help. So please don't give up because of administrative burden. Please just, if anything, just reach out to me, reach out to Chris, reach out to someone, and want to make sure that this is worth your time and you get paid for what you do.
You know, one of the things that I wondered about is, are there companies that are invested in site research that are larger companies that have, sites in multiple states, and and that they have more bargaining power, they have more streamlined processes. It's not that I want to walk away from research. I own my business. I want to continue to be involved in it. So I know I had found out about Dan, who did a little video several years ago about selling your business and of course continuing to work as part of that contract work for the business for the next few years as that transition takes place. I'm still interested in being a PI. I mean, at this point, it really doesn't serve me anymore to own my business. It probably would be more profitable for me to be paid as a PI. I have yet to pay myself as a PI. I own another business that I pay myself in, but as we split these apart and created a separate LLC for research, I'm not even paying myself yet. So, I would still have the credibility as a researcher and my name on a paper and, being on the cutting edge and all that. If somebody else basically owned and operated my business and hired me as a PI, and I would stay on for years. I'd be happy.
A lot of people do that. A lot of people do. How long ago did you split the LLCs?
Just a few months ago.
A few months ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just recent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of options out there. The really big, there's big site networks that are gobbling up the industry. I mean, you could always just go into them. There's other small growing site networks that are becoming more independent. There's all kinds of options depending on the direction that you want to take.
Yeah, but I think so. You should explore the option of making it work, right? And it's unfortunate that the industry does this to a lot of new investigators. Is you know what? There's a stat that's like 10% of PIs or 90% of PIs who do their first trial never do their second one again, and they always try to blame like, oh, site operations. They don't know how to manage. A lot of times it's cash flow issues. And we point the finger, most of the time I point the finger at the CROs. The CROs were supposed to be the organizations that make this industry run smoother, be more efficient. And instead, we're getting these huge organizations almost as big as the drug companies themselves that could care less whether sites are functioning properly as long as it doesn't impact enrollment at their study too much. Right. And it's unfortunate because they're an industry stakeholder, they're an important industry stakeholder, but they don't have the same incentives that the sponsors do for getting the trials done quickly and without problems. So we rant on CROs a lot on the show. I could almost guarantee in your situation, the issue is not with Eli Lilly, it's with a CRO, and you need to make some noise. And before you consider exploring the site or explore selling the site, I think you should try to maximize the profit you could get at your site and then sell it, because you're leaving a lot of money on the table if you're selling a cash strapped site as opposed to one that's self-sustaining. So you have every incentive also to try to make this work for yourself. And I mean, other than just advice like hang in there and platitudes like that, I think there are things you can do since you have multiple LLCs. One of them is if your other business is going to subsidize research, write a loan to it. Make sure your CPA is okay with how you're doing it. Charge interest, pay interest back to your company when you get paid, and then bill that to the sponsor and say, look, this is what I had to do to keep my patients in your study. And I think the reason is the CRO was not paying me on time for a variety of reasons that you can make conspiracies theories on, but maybe it's as simple as they don't care, or maybe it's as complex and evil as they're currently getting interest off of your money while they can, and if they do this to 1,000 sites, it's actually a good revenue stream.
Interesting. That's awesome information. I really appreciate it. I do think I need to step away, but I'll keep you guys on in the background. If you're going to continue talking,
Absolutely.
I'd be listen.
For sure. Thank you, Dr.
Pleasure to
Charlin.
meet you. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
Thank
nice
you.
meeting
Maybe
you,
we
Dr.
can
Charlin. You have a good day.
reconnect sometime soon, hopefully.
Yep.
Yep. Good
All
luck
right.
with your issue.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
What a story, guys. I mean, a published physician scientist, okay, who treats patients in an underserved community. I know where he's at now. Being pushed away, a specialist on top of that. And specialists in underserved communities don't have to do anything they don't want to do. They're like the kings of those communities. He's over here contemplating shutting down his research because a few CROs can't get their act together when it comes to paying sites properly. I'm almost 99% sure it's not Eli Lilly, guys.
It's not. It's not. Eli Lilly. Eli
So-
Lilly is by far one of the best out
Where
there.
I disagree with what Dan said, well, I'll take issue with it a little bit,
Let's go,
is-
Chris. Let's go.
is he blamed, and you as well, Dr. Fox, are blaming the CRO, and I'm with the FDA on this. The FDA came out and mandated a few years back that the sponsor is ultimately to blame for everything, and that's the case here. They need to know who they're hiring, right? If you're president of the United States and you hire an evil defense minister and they start attacking everybody, it's the president's fault.
FDA doesn't cover
Sponsor-
money.
No,
FDA doesn't
no,
cover
no, no,
money.
but
That's
the
contractual.
No, but the CRO said, the FDA said the sponsor is responsible for all work of the CRO. They're ultimately responsible, and in this case as well.
when it
But
impacts
No, it's not
operations.
though,
If a
because it's not
Yeah,
money.
absolutely. I completely
FDA
disagree. 100%
FDA
disagree.
never said FDA has steel
No, I'm
corners. They
not,
don't
I'm making a
care about
comparison.
money.
I'm not saying the
Yeah.
FDA said this. I'm making a comparison. I'm
Yeah.
saying,
Well, no, regulatory wise, like absolutely FDA is like your sponsor, you're on the hook for whatever the CRO monitors, for whatever regulatory issues are submitted. Yes. As far as money goes, no, FDA says look at the contract. That's
I
a
didn't,
legal thing.
yeah, I understand that. I'm not saying the FDA mandates that the sponsor is responsible for the CRO. What I'm saying is it's the exact same issue. From a site level, the sponsor is ultimately responsible. They hired this
Yes.
company. It's their fault I'm not getting paid. Hire
The
a
only
friggin'
thing
new
is
CRO.
have you read the CTAs though? They put loopholes in for that.
I understand. And again, that's the CRO's or the sponsor's responsibility. They allow this to happen. It's
Mhm.
their fault ultimately, period.
Yeah.
It's not the CRO's fault. Hire a better CRO, especially
Have
when
you
you're
seen those CTAs where I've seen the CTAs come in where it's literally the CTA says site agrees that sponsor is not a part of this agreement. Site will
no,
work
I
solely with the
absolutely have seen
CRO.
that. Absolutely have seen that. Regardless, again, this especially a reputable sponsor like Eli Lilly or Pfizer,
Yeah.
Mhm.
reputable. You know, it's ultimately their responsibility, and they're hiring these shady CROs that aren't paying sites. Hey, I still blame the sponsor personally, because they could
Right.
hire, a CRO that's, you know,
Mhm.
responsible for their actions and works according to what they would expect. So obviously they must expect this.
So here's where it gets complicated, and this is why Save Our Sites SOS Conference is so important. So Eli Lilly has, at least on paper, they've picked one of the best CROs that are out there. From a operation standpoint, when a company like Eli Lilly gets a select or what they call it, a preferred vendor arrangement with one of the big CROs, they get their best CRAs. They get like
Yep.
the A
They
team.
get the cherry pickers. Yep.
When a Joe Schmo biotech comes out and they're lucky enough to hire the same CRO, they're not getting the A team, right? They're getting the F team, whatever team you want. Like they're not getting the A team. Everybody knows this. Everybody at all levels of pharma know this. This is why big pharma can afford to pay these CROs more to guarantee they have the A team. So they, as far as Lilly's concerned, hey, our operations are set. We've got the budget to pay for top-notch monitoring, and they probably get it. What they're not thinking about though is their reputation when it comes to these investigators, because the investigator is looking at Eli Lilly like, why did you pick this CRO? And in fairness to Eli Lilly, this issue could be happening with any of the CROs they pick.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So what is Lilly to do then? Just maybe somebody needs to audit the CROs. Why are we not paying these sites on time? Maybe there needs to be a new position created.
Well, I think the resolution is fairly simple. And that is, as Dr. Fox was describing in terms of the contracts with the sites from the CROs, have a similar contract between a sponsor and the CRO. If we
Oh, it's
receive
there. I
X,
just don't think we can read it. I've
sure,
never. Yeah.
but specific to site payments or any kind of pain points there are. But if you're not paying sites within X number of days of what their contract stipulates, we're not paying you.
So where's the late fees? Oh, I thought about this. I was talking to someone when I was in college, and whenever they went to like a dinner, a diner, they went to go out to eat or something like that, they would take a roll of quarters and they would put the quarters along the entire table. And then what happened was throughout the course of the meal, every time that waiter or waitress screwed up, they would slowly pick one of the quarters off the table. Boom, boom. And by the end of the meal, that was the tip. So you start off with this big number, and then every time you screw up, it whittles down because obviously you're not doing a good job.
Yeah.
And then
Mhm.
by the end of the thing, there you go. So your incentive would be
This-
to do it properly.
This must have been a few years ago, like 2019 or something.
It was a long time ago, Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks for aging me there. Hopefully the
2023.
concept is still there.
2023, the quarters wouldn't work. It'd have to be dollar bills.
But look,
Yeah, there
this
you go. Put out dollar
industry,
bills.
this industry is all about auditing, QA, QC. The sponsors do plenty of auditing of their CROs when it comes to the operations. They look at every CRA's resume. Why
Mhm.
can't they just audit site payments as well and say, hey, we understand. And I think part of it is being aware of that this is a problem. I think a lot of sites don't speak up. And or when they
Well,
do, the CRO keeps it on the hush.
I was on SAGs at CROs, and I sat there because it was during COVID. And I said, why aren't you making site payments a KPI? Why aren't you making it a metric? Because they came out and they tried to present all these different metrics about how sites behaved. And I sat there and I said, why aren't you doing this for yourself? Why don't you look in the mirror? I was dismissed
What is
from
an
the
SAG?
SAG,
What's an SAG?
site advisory group, site advisory board.
Okay.
Bring in a bunch of sites just to make it look like you're listening, and then you quiet the people that you don't want to hear anymore.
I love that.
Well, so one thing I think we often forget is, and I said this earlier, it's a business and there's two sides to this business, right? So sponsors have a number of items they have to keep in mind in terms to have a successful business. And one of those things are on their R&D that they're able to accomplish for studies, right? And part of that is keeping sites happy, keeping them paid, and keeping them recruiting. I mean, one of the biggest issues in research is recruitment.
Mhm.
So, you know, you hear this FMV all the time, for fair market value. Well, guess what? Pay me better, I'll do a better job of getting you patients. And that's true of many sites, not all sites. It doesn't matter what you pay them, they may not be able to get patients for you. But for many sites, and this is what we were initially going to do, having similar studies, this kind of works into that.
Yep.
If you have two studies with the same patient population, which one are you gonna enroll in first if the budgets are very different, right? One's great and one's not too good. I have those two studies and they're primarily the same study. Guess what? That one study is getting all the patients, the one that I'm getting paid better on.
Or even you're paying like timely, or they're actually being compliant.
Sure. I mean,
you know,
there's different metrics, but primarily it's if I'm getting 15,000 a patient on this study for the same work, I'm getting 8,000 on this study for the same work, I'm going with 15,000 a patient.
But what would happen? So what would happen on that 8,000 per patient study where you got paid the day of, whereas the 15,000 one you had to spend half of your administrative load just to get the money? Then how are you netting? Or you really want to pay for the more? You want to enroll in the more expensive one where you're never going to get the money, and you have to spend more money to collect it?
So in my
Or would you rather
situation, yes.
deflate it?
In my situation, yes, I would take the 15,000.
You take more money and have to work harder for it.
I wouldn't have to work any harder for it. I would just wait. I wouldn't be one of those sites complaining. There's enough money in our account that money's not a concern in our business account. But to address what you're asking primarily, if yes, money's an issue and you need immediate funding, of course, you're going to go with the $8,000 patient.
See, because I think you're going to be working. If you were to follow like the passive route for the more money, odds are you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Why? I've always been paid. I've never not been paid.
Interesting. On everything, invoiceables and all.
Correct. I've always been paid. It's just sometimes it takes 6 months to a year, but I've always been paid.
6 months, a year, yeah.
So it sounds like you've built a pretty good financial battery to where you could survive the weather.
Oh yeah, we could go a couple years without any funds.
Yeah, and that's after like what 10 years of being a site, maybe 5, maybe we got to this level like at 5 years.
Yep.
That's another, I mean, and that's why when sites get big enough, they stop complaining so much about these things. And guess who goes to these big conferences? Those sites.
Those guys.
So
The
this
ones
doesn't
that
get
don't have a
addressed.
problem.
And this doesn't get addressed to the sponsors when the sponsors show up and say, hey, we're here to listen to see what sites have to say about research. Well, you're only getting like the top 10% of sites. They're like Chris. They don't care if they get paid in a year or 6 months or 3 months. you know, they're here, they got enough studies to where somebody's paying at some point to pay the bills, and the owners have enough to do dividends and all that stuff. So whether it comes in 2023 or 2024 or 2025, we're still okay.
Now, where that changes is if we reach hyperinflation. Of course, then it changes. I want to get paid yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe and also there's something to be said in that variable of which study do you recruit for, if 8 or 15K. There's also which study is like more realistic to accept your patient, like where are you going to actually be able to randomize patients?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I have to work my ass off to get one patient randomized, but I can get like 3 or 4 randomized relatively simple in that $8,000 study, I'm going there.
Well, I said assuming they're both comparable, right?
Okay,
Same work.
gotcha.
Now, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm with you there too, Dan. If I have to put in 4 times the effort, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe I
Yeah.
would prefer the $8,000 just because it's easier to get my patients in. If I'm at a 90% screen failure rate on the 15,000 and I'm at 20% on the 8, I probably do go with the 8.
So that
Because I'm
brings
getting
us,
more patients in. I'm getting
that's
more patients in,
actually,
and we'll make more money.
so that's
Mhm.
perfect segue to where we wanted to start on pairing your studies. So you get to a point when you are a financially stable enough site to where you can be picky, like Chris, not almost Yuma clinical trials, not yet. We could be somewhat picky. So I had a recent example. We had an offer for an obesity, same sponsor. Okay. We had an offer. They say you can only pick one. You're still a new site. We would give you both studies if you were more experienced, but you're a new site. So you can take obesity with diabetes or just obesity. And my PI
Hmm.
told me, well, why'd you pick the harder one? Though I chose obesity with diabetes. Why'd you pick the harder one? Well, I told them, look, PI, we have another obesity study, right? So we have a place for those patients. We also have a diabetes study that's screen failing like crazy. Study
Oh my God,
wide is like
I see where this is
90%.
going.
Yeah, 90% screen fail rates across the entire study, not just my site. By the way, we have 100% screen fail rate right now. And guess what we started doing? We stopped screening as much because we know where they're gonna fail. These are not real world patients. So I told him, I said, look, from all these 5 screen fails we already have in like our first 2 months, 4 of these 5 qualify for this study that I picked. So we already have the other indication taken care of. I need a home for my screen failures. Because if I don't pick this study, they're not going to go anywhere. There's no study for them. So then he's like, oh, it makes sense. You got to like pair them. I'm like, yeah, you got to pair
Yep.
the studies you have. It's like wine and cheese. But a lot of sites, when they're newer, they don't think about this. They just say yes to everything.
They don't have the opportunity to think about that oftentimes.
But you get to a point where you do. And I think
Sure.
this discussion internally has not had it enough. I think at the very experienced sites they are, but I didn't learn this in my first year of research, but it's in Yuma Clinical Trials' first year and a half of existence because I have 17 years of experience. Otherwise, I would have chosen the easier study too, like my PI wanted.
Mhm.
But then what are you doing? You're leaving money on the table with these screen fillers.
So that a lot of things just clicked there. I remember, so the way we always saw it is we always saw it like a patient was falling from the air. The patient was falling, and we would cast as many nets as we could to save that patient. And if the patient fell through one net, we would have another net right underneath there to catch him. And so no matter what would happen, we would try to have as many nets as possible to catch as many patients as possible. So that's kind of where we did our strategy for the trial development. And sometimes when you run into that, there's also the question is, well, can a patient be on both trials? And that's where you got to be real tricky. We didn't really do that a whole lot. Some of those maybe IVD ones, fine, but we're not don't really want to do that, and especially with the inclusion exclusions. The other thing that just caught my ear when I heard you talk about that, Dan, is maybe that could be a really good net for your screen failure ratios. Or if you had one person failing, you're not going to get paid for it on a screen failure ratio. You had this other trial over here. Well, maybe that could help to compensate for your efforts.
Yeah. And sponsor liked the idea when I brought it up at the SSV site selection visit. I said, look, she asked me like, how many patients do you think you can get? And I told her, we already know because the screen failures of our other study qualify for this study. So I already have 4 patients ready to go on
We're
day
ready.
1.
Yeah.
And these are patients that don't need to be convinced that research is a good idea. These are patients we've already done all that work for. They're ready to go. So
Mhm.
she loved that. She's like, yeah, that makes sense. So there's a lot of levels to this strategy that I don't think's ever been discussed anywhere on the internet.
And you just did a site selection visit, I think Friday, right? 2 days ago?
We had
4
2
or 5 days ago?
SSVs last week. Yeah, we had one for this study and one for a hypertension study that we did
Mhm.
last
No,
week.
no, the RSV and COVID one. Is that last week or the week
Oh,
before?
I did that one for another. Yes, I did that. Exactly right. Chris, you want to share about that one? That was a good one. Same strategy, really.
Yeah, so Dan's other site, he's speaking specific to Yuma there. This site's in California.
I was on
We
that SSV too on Zoom.
Yeah, so we have that site has an RSV study. Part of the RSV, so they're expecting a 90% screen failure rate for this
Wow.
study. It's going to be higher than that. It's going to be like 99%.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, what it is it's a RSV study, and basically they're paying all screen failures. And you're testing the patient when they walk in the door. They're, private practice, they come in, hey, doctor, I'm sick. What do I have? Do I have COVID? Do I have the flu? Well, you have them join the study and you check them, right? So right there, it takes about 10 minutes to get the results with what the sponsor is providing. And it checks for COVID, flu, and RSV. So if they have the flu, we have no home for them. But if they have RSV, they qualify for the study. They have COVID, they most likely qualify for this other study, which Dan did the site selection visit for. So I assume he brought this up as he did with the diabetes and obesity study. I assume he brought this up.
Same
as
argument.
well.
I literally copy and pasted my strategy from the last SSV to that one. It was the same thing, just different indications.
Yep.
We're already pre-screening for your study. We already have people ready to be screened. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it
And
worked well.
I assume the CRA was like, yeah, that seems like a good idea.
Oh yeah, she was just checking boxes, but yeah, she was like, oh great.
Yeah.
And
She's just
yeah,
working for her paycheck.
yep. And we'll
Yep,
see how we
going through
get
the
paid on all.
motions.
We'll see how we
Yep.
get paid on all these studies, because
Yeah. Hey, do you think she gets her paycheck on time?
yes, but
I thought-
there have been cases where with fly-by-night sponsors
Mhm.
that aren't able to pay their CRAs.
Yeah, we've heard that story a couple of times where the CRAs were months behind in payment.
Romark, I believe, was the sponsor's name. I don't care, but we've done a video on them. Romark. They're this European conglomerate that does all kinds of stuff from like skis to who knows. They were riding that COVID wave of trying to find the next cure for COVID. And they created this really easy study where sites were encouraged to enroll like 100 patients each. And then they hired their own CRAs, like contractors. They didn't use a CRO. And so whenever you have a sponsor that you never heard of, that's not hiring a CRO, red flag. Because a sponsor you never heard of, you never heard of them for a reason. They don't know what they're doing. 99% of the time, they're going to hire a CRO. So when they don't, that's a red flag. They started telling sites, hey, we're going to pay you for all this stuff. Sites didn't get paid. There's sites that to this day, 3 years later, have yet to get paid, and they lost 6 figures
Wow.
doing this study because they paid patients with COVID to do their study, and the patients were getting paid, the staff were getting paid. One of the first signs of this crumbling, falling apart, the CRAs started complaining on LinkedIn they weren't getting paid. And that's when we
So-
all knew it's over. Because when you don't take care of
Mhm.
your CRAs, there is no more study. They're not showing up. Would a
Yep.
CRA ever show up for free to monitor? That shit's
Well,
stressful.
some of these monitors did for a while.
Wow.
So we've discussed this before, Dan, but the first test, and I tell all of our clients this on considering taking a new study with somebody they haven't heard of is, are they publicly traded? That's a good test for, can you be assured that you're going to get paid? Now, you still may not, it's always a possibility, but more likely than not, if they're going to continue to be publicly traded, you are getting paid.
Unless the bottom falls out like in
That's what I
08.
said. Yeah, that could happen.
Yep.
Pfizer winds up getting sued, you know.
And if not publicly traded, there is a subset. Are they using a CRO that we know of? And because there are a few examples of not publicly traded, but they use CROs. And some of the really big pharma, I forget which one it actually is. One of the big ones that I was like, there's no way these guys are not publicly traded, is actually not publicly traded.
Parexel. Parexel is private.
Parexel, but like one of the big pharma, there's like a big pharma. I just saw their, because I was talking to my PI about a study and then we wanted to look at their stock.
Is it Takeda?
No. It's like either Shearing Plow or one of these
Roche?
companies. It might be Roche.
Roche Genentech.
I don't know. One of
It's
these.
a pretty big one.
Yeah, one, but they all use CRO, even the small ones you've never heard of, all use CRO for the most part. So yeah, there's a lot of issues with this is why we're doing Save Our Sites and SOS
Mhm.
Conference.
So do you think we'll talk? Maybe that would be a good thing to put at SOS is the complementary trial selection.
Yeah, I want to.
Maybe some good examples.
Another
Maybe
pet
even
peeve of mine
strategies.
is that I want that topic. I want exploratory endpoints and how it's killing
Mhm.
our industry.
Yeah.
It's helping in the long run, it's killing in the short run. There might
Yeah.
not be a long run if we
Alright.
keep
Yep.
using these exploratory endpoints to make trials impossible for both patients and sites.
I remember when we wrote grants, they said the one thing that'll always kill your grant is the while you're at it.
Yeah.
And I
While
think
you're at
that's
it, get
the-
an MRI of this knee, that
Yep.
knee, and the back.
They said, and it never fails. You write this multi-million-dollar grant, and some doctor over on the third floor of, you've never met him before. He goes, "Hey, I saw you're writing this grant. Can you go ahead and add an X-ray in there for me, or taking just
Yeah.
one more tube of blood? Just one more tube of blood. It's not a big deal." But then you get 30 of those, and then all of a sudden you're taking 5 gallons of blood out of a patient, and everyone wants their while you're at it.
The while you're at
And-
it are currently killing me right now with one of our studies.
It always does. The while you're at it's are a killer, and it really drops your quality and your attention toward your primary objectives.
Well, there's a lot of topics, guys. Thank you. Anything else we forgot to mention or you want to get off your chest
just-
before we wrap up?
I just go ahead,
Go
Chris.
ahead.
I was
So I
just
was
gonna
just
say
Go ahead,
that
go ahead.
interview with the doctor, you brought on, brought back a lot of memories. And I've heard that conversation time and time again. It just breaks my heart every time I hear it. It's all these patients are suffering, not because we don't have the trials for them, but because we can't get our stuff together. It just ticks me off every time I hear that story.
It's happens every day. That just happens to be serendipitously one that lined up with our time that we were able to get him on video. But it's literally going on like everywhere with people doing studies and especially guys like him, investigator owned sites. That's exactly what the sponsors want. And unknowingly to them, probably because of CROs, they're pushing them away. So
You
yeah,
muted, Chris.
should get everyone pissed off. While Chris unmutes himself, it should get everyone pissed off.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, you're back.
Yes.
You're back, Chris. Last
I didn't
things on
really-
your
I didn't
mind.
really have anything to say other than check your email.
Ah,
I just
well,
think I forwarded you something.
thank you. Probably another study or something.
No, it's something different.
All right, well, that's my call to action, guys. I gotta go. But thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Follow Dr. Fox. LinkedIn. His LinkedIn profile is underneath. His podcast is amazing, especially with the skits and the
Skits?
approach. He does
Wait,
skits.
skits?
Yeah,
Never heard it? You've never heard
he's
one of
never
it? Yeah, I've
listened.
got
He's never
skits.
listened.
You've
Chris is
never
on your
listened?
board and hasn't heard your
Come on,
podcast.
Chris.
Skits. I will have to check that out.
You know, don't even listen to the whole interview. Just listen to like the first 5 minutes for the skit, and then go move on to the next one.
There you go.
Let him know.
I
Let
will
Dr.
definitely
Fox know
check that
your
out.
honest feedback because you are on his board.
I want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
I
think
think
that
they're
has
great.
anything to do with. I don't think the two kind of do they exist together.
I mean, it's a CRPN based podcast.
Okay.
So
All right.
if you have any advice, please feel free to reach out.
I will definitely check it out.
It's in your scope of work, Chris. That's what you signed up for.
Yep.
But
I
I like
anyways,
the payments one.
I put it on the to-do list.
well,
Yeah.
besides the skit, he has the way he picks a topic, then he interviews two people separately on the same topic, same questions. And then he edits it at the end. So you see if they're the same message you're getting from two independent people or a completely different message. And
Interesting.
the listener can make their own analysis as to, okay, well, he didn't just pick a guest that has his agenda, for his axe to grind. So it's a pretty fair podcast in that sense. I've never actually seen it done before. So
I have a feeling there will be something similar at our conference.
Yeah, we could do that. Sure.
Well, what I mean is just kind of not necessarily arguments, but disagreements amongst
Yeah.
all of us.
we're
Have
there
fierce
for it.
conversations. Get something done.
Yep.
I think
You're
we'll have
there
a
for
first aid kit on site. So
some genuine
defib.
conversation.
all right, guys, like, subscribe, comment, share, go follow Dr. Fox. I'd tell you to follow Chris, but you know where to be found, man. So just follow me
Careful,
instead.
you might.
I'll
yeah,
get
you
you
might
in
be
touch with
following a Nazi if you're not careful.
Yeah,
That's
don't do
right.
Don't do that.
All
I'm
right.
not
Like,
a
subscribe,
Nazi.
comment,
He's not
share.
referring to me.
There is
No,
another Chris
no,
Sauber.
different Chris. Different Chris.
There was another Chris Sauber on LinkedIn. I don't know if it still is. That is not this Chris. That actually
Yeah.
is like a neo-Nazi. He put it in his headline or something.
Yeah.
Stay
You
away
know-
from that guy.
If you want Chris, you just put it in a picture. It doesn't even have to be of you. Do that blue car. Make that blue car your profile pic behind you, and that way we know it's you. Otherwise, I just see
That
a
would be
little
awesome.
random dot.
Yeah.
Chris will get on
Cool.
LinkedIn soon, guys. Thank you, guys. Like, subscribe, comment, share, follow.
Right.
Bye
Thanks,
bye.
everyone.